Yeah, man, it was terrible. I knew I was madly in love with my wife. The minute I saw her, it was kind of love at first sight. But getting to the altar was so tough.
At 13 years old, Jeff Bridges etched 3 simple words on his bedroom door, words that would follow him like a shadow for decades to come. To the world outside, Jeff would later become a Hollywood icon, a man whose performances captured hearts and whose calm presence on screen felt unshakable. But behind the curtain, there was another story, one the cameras could never quite catch. He suffered from panic attacks before stepping into scenes. He would hide away in garages just to avoid his father's expectations. Even now, at 75 years old, his heart rate still surges past 140 beats per minute when he's preparing for a role, higher than when he endured chemotherapy for cancer. Recently, when he finally opened up during a powerful awards ceremony, his words stunned the audience. What he revealed explained why he almost walked away from acting more than once, and why the weight of fame never sat comfortably on his shoulders. Jeffrey Leon Bridges entered the world on December 4th, 1949. Unlike most newborns who are greeted with lullabies and nursery rhymes, Jeff was born into the rhythms of show business. His parents, Lloyd and Dorothy Bridges, were both working actors, which meant his early life was framed not by the quiet hum of suburbia, but by the buzz of film sets and the glow of studio lights. His very first appearance on screen came when he was just 6 months old. The movie was The Company She Keeps, released in 1951. The director needed a crying baby for a particular scene, and baby Jeff fit the role perfectly. With a small pinch from actress Jane Greer, Jeff let out a wail that was captured in one flawless take. His name wasn't even listed in the credits. Instead, he was simply marked down as Crying Baby. Later in life, Jeff would joke that his first paycheck probably went toward nothing more glamorous than diapers and formula. But without even realizing it, his Hollywood career had already begun before he could form his first words. His father, Lloyd Bridges, was already a recognized figure in the industry, celebrated for his role in the classic Western High Noon. Yet fame never softened Lloyd's realism. He understood the instability of Hollywood in a way few outsiders could. Around 1957 or 1958, Lloyd gathered Jeff and his older brother Beau together for a sobering talk. He told them the truth about acting, that most actors in Hollywood made less than $5,000 a year, and he even pulled out printed figures to prove it. It wasn't the glamorous gold mine people thought it was. Acting, he explained, was filled with uncertainty. To hammer his point home, Lloyd set strict rules in the Bridges household. No acting jobs unless school grades were higher than a B+. Both boys were expected to consider careers outside of show business, maybe as engineers or something practical, something solid. Lloyd wasn't trying to crush their dreams. He just wanted them to understand that beneath the flashing lights and red carpets, Hollywood was an industry where failure was far more common than success. For young Jeff, those words planted a quiet unease that would linger for years. Even as he grew up surrounded by scripts, rehearsals, and dinner-table conversations about films, he carried a gnawing fear that maybe acting wasn't stable enough, or worse, that he would only ever be known as Lloyd Bridges' son. By the time he turned 13, this fear had hardened into something stronger: rebellion. In 1963, Jeff took a black marker and scrawled 3 bold words on his bedroom door: "Not an actor." It wasn't just teenage defiance. It was a declaration. He wanted to step outside his father's shadow and carve his own path, whatever it took. Instead of following Beau, who was already diving into acting scripts, Jeff threw himself into art and music. He began painting at the Brentwood Art Center, exploring colors and textures with the same curiosity he'd later bring to his film roles. On August 9, 1964, he sold his very first canvas for $35. It was a small victory, but for Jeff, it was proof that he could make something of his own. Around the same time, he co-founded a surf rock band with friends called the Nozzles. They played small fairs around Santa Monica, filling the air with jangly guitar riffs and teenage energy. His older brother might have been memorizing lines, but Jeff was memorizing guitar chords and brush strokes. To this day, some of the art trophies he won in high school during 1966 remain in his studio, a reminder of the boy who once swore he'd never act. This wasn't just a phase. It was a statement. Jeff didn't want to walk the road that was already paved. He wanted to blaze his own trail, even if it meant walking away from the family business. But the Los Angeles of the 1960s wasn't only about art and surf rock. It was also a time of cultural upheaval, experimentation, and temptation. By the age of 16, Jeff had started smoking marijuana, sometimes even before morning math class. The summer of 1967 introduced him to LSD, which he experimented with during jam sessions in the Bohemian hills of Topanga Canyon. That same year, one late night in September, the police pulled him over in his Volkswagen Beetle. They found a half-smoked roach in the car. He was still a minor, so instead of being booked, the officers called his father. For the Bridges family, it was a terrifying wake-up call. His mother, Dorothy, insisted Jeff begin weekly counseling. Lloyd, stern but caring, personally drove him to a couple of rehab meetings that October in Malibu. For Jeff, it felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, peering over into a future he didn't want. He later admitted that it was his first real off-ramp moment, a point where he could have veered completely off course. But lectures and punishments weren't getting through to him. So Lloyd tried a different approach, something clever, something that would speak to Jeff's restless spirit. One morning in early 1968, over a quiet breakfast, Lloyd leaned across the table and shared a thought that would change everything. Acting, he said, could be the ultimate form of freedom. Through acting, you could live endless lives. One day you could be a pilot, the next a painter, the next a musician, all without having to enlist in the military or commit yourself to one rigid path. It wasn't a trap, he explained. It was a doorway to everything Jeff loved. That idea sparked something inside him. Acting no longer sounded like a cage. It sounded like possibility. Not long after, Jeff reluctantly agreed to take on a small acting role in his father's television series, Sea Hunt. It wasn't some grand career move. Truthfully, Jeff did it because he wanted to earn enough money to buy a new Stratocaster guitar. But Lloyd's quiet strategy had worked. The seed had been planted. Acting no longer represented just his father's world. It was slowly becoming his own. By the time Jeff was 17, he made a decision that would set him apart from most of his Hollywood peers. On May 12, 1967, he walked into a military office and enlisted in the Coast Guard Reserve. The commitment lasted 8 long years. On paper, it was supposed to be part-time service, but in reality, it felt like anything but. Jeff spent weekends scrubbing rust off buoys, painting decks, and pulling exhausting midnight shifts. He often described it later as torture, not because he resented serving his country, but because it was grueling work for a young man who also felt the pull of music, art, and now, reluctantly, acting. Still, the schedule left him with breaks long enough to explore Hollywood. During those small windows of freedom, he dipped his toe into films, and it was during these brief escapes from military duty that Jeff starred in The Last Picture Show in 1971. And Thunderbolt and Lightfoot in 1974. Both performances earned him Academy Award nominations. It was a strange double life. One weekend in uniform, the next weekend on a film set chasing Hollywood's highest honor. He later laughed about the absurdity of showing up to Coast Guard drills in his formal blues just days after walking red carpets. By 1975, his service finally came to an end. Coincidentally, that was the very same year America officially ended the draft for Vietnam. For Jeff, it felt like he was stepping out of one chapter and into another, though even then he wasn't convinced that acting would be his life's calling. He had joined the Coast Guard partly as a way to keep himself grounded, to avoid drifting too far into the chaos of the 60s. But he never expected to find himself torn between two worlds, discipline and duty on one hand, and the intoxicating lure of art and storytelling on the other. His restless curiosity eventually took him east. In 1967, before his breakthrough roles, Jeff had hopped on a Greyhound bus and traveled to New York City. His destination was the Herbert Berghof Studio, a school known for its rigorous acting program. For many, studying there was a badge of honor, proof of their commitment to the craft. But Jeff wasn't there for discipline, While others sweated through line readings and scene studies, Jeff was sneaking out into the streets, more fascinated by the city's art scene than its acting schools. He wandered through Greenwich Village with his panoramic camera, photographing the raw energy of subways, murals, and musicians. He spent more nights in smoky clubs like Café Wa than in rehearsal halls, soaking in the energy of live music, open mic nights, and poetry readings. That short stay in New York wasn't wasted, though. It gave him something priceless, a sense of independence. Whenever his parents questioned whether he was serious about acting, he could point to those few months at the Berghoff studio as proof that he was at least giving it a shot. In truth, though, Jeff was still searching for his place in the world. Acting was a door left slightly open, but he hadn't yet decided whether to walk through it. Despite his uncertainty, Hollywood seemed determined to pull him back. In 1972, after the Last Picture Show had made him one of the most talked-about young actors in the industry, Jeff did something few expected. He nearly quit. Instead of chasing the momentum, he retreated. He bought a modest Malibu beach house and rented a studio space in Venice, not to study scripts, but to paint ocean scenes and work on music. He wasn't chasing gallery openings or record deals. He simply wanted space to breathe, to explore his creativity without the pressure of Hollywood watching. To friends and family, it looked like self-sabotage. To Jeff, it felt like survival. His father was concerned, but it was his mother, Dorothy, who took the worry most seriously. Dorothy was the emotional anchor of the Bridges family, the one who tracked every audition, every meeting, every opportunity in a neat little notebook she kept by her side. When Jeff started talking about skipping roles, Dorothy grew anxious. She could see how talented he was, but she also understood his hesitations. Hollywood wasn't kind to those who hesitated. In 1973, the family gathered in the living room for what became a turning point. Lloyd reminded Jeff that acting wasn't a prison. It could be a playground. He repeated the same philosophy he had shared years earlier. Through acting, Jeff could live 1,000 different lives without ever being trapped by one. For Jeff, that meeting was both frustrating and grounding. On one hand, he wanted freedom, and Hollywood felt like a chain around his ankle. On the other, he couldn't deny the truth in his father's words. Every role was a chance to explore something new, something different. Acting didn't have to mean giving up painting or music. In fact, it could give him the financial stability to fund those passions. Slowly, he started to see acting less as a threat to his identity and more as a way to keep exploring it. The tug-of-war between art and Hollywood would become a constant theme in Jeff's life. He loved acting, but he never loved fame. For him, the spotlight was never the prize. It was just the cost of doing the work. That's why, even as opportunities kept coming, he often flirted with the idea of leaving. The irony was clear. Hollywood couldn't stop offering him roles, and yet Jeff kept questioning whether he wanted them. It was this tension, between talent and doubt, fame and freedom, that shaped much of his early career. And yet, despite his misgivings, the 1970s proved to be a decade where Jeff's career took root in ways he couldn't ignore. After The Last Picture Show and Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, he found himself working alongside some of the biggest names in the industry. Directors saw in him a kind of authenticity, a naturalness that couldn't be taught. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't trying too hard, but there was something magnetic about him. Audiences connected with that honesty. Even when Jeff felt like an imposter, viewers saw a genuine soul on screen. Still, the anxiety never fully left him. Before stepping onto sets, Jeff often battled nerves so intense that his heart would race uncontrollably. Panic attacks would creep in just when he needed calm the most. He developed small rituals to manage them: deep breathing, meditation, even retreating into quiet corners of the set to gather himself. Outwardly, he seemed calm, collected, even unshakable. Inwardly, he was waging battles most people never saw. This inner struggle would define much of his journey in the years ahead. For every accolade, there was a moment of doubt. For every role that brought him recognition, there was a private panic that threatened to undo it all. And as the 1980s approached, Jeff found himself standing once again at a crossroads. Would he lean fully into acting, embracing the path so many had expected of him since childhood? Or would he keep pulling back, trying to preserve the other parts of himself that fame so often tried to erase? As the 1980s began, Jeff Bridges was no longer just Lloyd's son or a promising young actor. He was carving his own place in Hollywood. Yet with every step forward, he carried that same contradiction. The natural ease of a star paired with the private unease of someone who never fully believed he belonged. His roles during this period reflected that duality. Films like Starman in 1984 showcased his ability to blend vulnerability with charisma, a performance so raw and human it earned him yet another Oscar nomination. Audiences were drawn to his authenticity. He wasn't larger than life like so many leading men of the era. Instead, he felt approachable, someone who could live next door. That quality made him unique, but it also deepened the pressure he put on himself. Every time the industry celebrated him, Jeff quietly wondered how long he could keep delivering. It was during this decade, however, that Jeff found an anchor strong enough to steady him in ways Hollywood never could. In 1975, while filming Rancho Deluxe in Montana, he met a young waitress named Susan Geston. She wasn't part of the industry, and she didn't care about the glamour of red carpets or Oscar buzz. She was grounded, funny, and entirely unimpressed by his fame. At first, Jeff hesitated. Commitment scared him. Marriage felt like a cage, another kind of trap. But Susan's quiet strength and patience wore down his doubts. In 1977, they married, and over the years, they raised 3 daughters together. For Jeff, this wasn't just a love story. It was salvation. Susan became the steady rhythm in his life. The reminder that beyond scripts, awards, and industry chaos, there was something real and enduring waiting for him at home. Still, even with a family grounding him, Jeff's old anxieties followed him onto sets. Panic attacks remained a part of his process. He would sometimes describe acting as a battle with his own body, his heart racing, his mind clouded with doubt, even as the camera rolled. He learned to work with the fear, to use it as fuel rather than letting it paralyze him. But the toll was undeniable. There were nights when he'd return home physically drained, not from the work itself, but from the effort of holding himself together through sheer willpower. The 1990s brought new highs. His role in The Fisher King in 1991 earned widespread praise, but it was in 1998 that Jeff stumbled into a role that would forever change how the world saw him. Jeffrey "The Dude" Lebowski in the Coen brothers' The Big Lebowski. At first, the film was only a modest success at the box office, but over time it transformed into a cult phenomenon. Fans embraced the Dude as more than just a character. It became a cultural icon, a symbol of nonchalance, freedom, and authenticity. Ironically, Jeff initially worried about taking the part, fearing it might reinforce a lazy, slacker image. But the role became one of his most enduring legacies. To this day, people shout, "The Dude abides," when they see him on the street. Jeff laughs at it, but deep down, he recognizes that the character resonated because it reflected a piece of himself, the part that longed to escape pressure and simply exist without judgment. But life, as always, refused to stay simple. In the 2000s, Jeff's career soared with roles in films like Seabiscuit and Iron Man. Then, in 2009, after decades of nominations and near misses, he finally won the Academy Award for Best Actor for Crazy Heart. Standing on stage, holding the golden statue, he looked out at the audience and saw the dream every actor chases finally fulfilled. But even in that moment, he admitted later, he felt the familiar grip of anxiety. The applause was deafening, but the doubts inside were louder. He loved the work. He never loved the spotlight. And then came the greatest battle of his life. In October 2020, Jeff revealed to the world that he had been diagnosed with lymphoma. For a man who had carried private struggles for so long, this was a moment of raw openness. Treatment was grueling. Chemotherapy left him weak, stripped of the strength that had carried him through years of performing. At one point, he contracted COVID-19 while his immune system was already compromised. He nearly died. Doctors told him it was a miracle he pulled through. Jeff himself described it as being close to the pearly gates. Surviving cancer forced Jeff to confront everything he had spent decades wrestling with: fear, purpose, identity, and the meaning of a career built under a spotlight he never fully wanted. During treatment, he often measured his heart rate. To his surprise, it never spiked as high as it did before a film scene. Acting, even at 70, still terrified him more than cancer. That revelation shook him. Why had he spent so much of his life doubting himself, fearing something he was clearly born to do? In 2023, during a major awards ceremony, Jeff finally decided to break his silence. Standing before a hushed crowd, he spoke not as an untouchable Hollywood star, but as a man who had survived fear, doubt, addiction, anxiety, and cancer. His voice trembled as he admitted that even after more than 6 decades in the business, panic still lived inside him, that his heart still raced to dangerous levels before a scene, that more than once he had considered walking away forever, and then he said something that left the room stunned. "I never wanted fame. I only wanted freedom." The words landed heavy, because they explained everything. Why he nearly quit acting in the 70s, why he clung to painting and music, why he carried anxiety even in triumph. For Jeff Bridges, acting was never about applause. It was about survival. It was about finding pieces of himself in the lives of others, about staying curious, about turning fear into art. Today at 75, Jeff continues to act, but with a clarity he didn't have in his youth. He no longer chases roles out of obligation or fear of fading away. He chooses them because they allow him to live, to explore, to create. His paintings still hang in his studio. His guitar still rests by his side. His marriage to Susan remains the bedrock of his life. And though the world sees him as a Hollywood legend, Jeff Bridges knows himself as something far simpler. A man who spent his whole life learning how to breathe through fear, and who finally found the courage to tell the truth.